Good afternoon and welcome to Prescient Therapeutics investor briefing today. This is a special briefing to run through the personalised cell therapy PTX-100. I'm Patrick Nelson, MD at Reach. I'll host the session, and as mentioned, we're holding this session in response to a lot of interesting inquiries that we've seen by investors on recent data release on PTX-100. To run the session, however, we've got the MD of PTX, Stephen Yatomi-Clarke, and thank you for everyone taking the time, shareholders and new investors, for taking the time to join the session today. Prescient Therapeutics is an Australian biotech which is on a mission to take cancer treatment conversation from fight towards personalised cure. The company has developed a diversified pipeline of cancer therapies addressing underserved cancers, as well as platform technologies that strive to change the way cancers are treated. All of the assets have been developed by world-leading partners, including UPenn, Oxford, McCallum and Moffitt, and many more, and which gives the company a world-class pedigree. Today, Stephen's going to be providing a broad update overview on the company, but he's going to be mainly focused on the targeted cell therapy PTX-100, which is exhibiting promising data in a disease of unmet need, and he's going to discuss the stellar data which has come out of their clinical studies and the potential for PTX-100 to leap into clinical development very soon. Outside of PTX, he'll give an update on or an outline of the company's diversified portfolios, both later stage and emerging assets for cancer treatment. Anyone that is new to PTX and isn't currently receiving news and announcements can type PTX into the chat at any time during today's presentation, and we'll ensure you get added to receive investor updates as they come through. We expect the session to run for roughly 45 minutes. If you would like to ask a question, type it into the question box. We like our sessions to be interactive, so please ask questions. If I don't get to them at that point in time, I'll pose all questions to Stephen at the end of the session. The presentations that Reach put forward are only suitable for self-directed investors who have the experience and capabilities to do their own analysis and make an informed decision that's suitable for them. Any information contained in today's presentation is general in nature, doesn't consider your personal circumstances, and you need to decide for yourself whether it is appropriate for you. The information we're giving you today is for educational purposes. Past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance. Look, I've given a bit of an insight into PTX, so I'm not going to go back over any of those. Last year, PTX had major milestones throughout the year. They were granted orphan drug designation for PTX-100 by the FDA. They released ongoing excellent safety and efficacy data on PTX-100 and 200. They struck manufacturing and supply agreements for Omnicar cell therapies. They unveiled Omnicar's complementary Cell Prime M manufacturing enhancement platform and a Cell Prime A. There are lots of exciting things going on with Prescient and their CAR-T therapy platform, but today we're focused on PTX-100, and as mentioned, has the potential to leapfrog deep into clinical development, and we're all particularly excited about the potential for PTX-100 to improve patient outcomes and generate near-term value, probably Stephen most of all. So Stephen, at that point, I will hand the floor to yourself.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your day, especially at lunchtime. I think it will be worth it for you to, and thank you also for all of the incoming inquiries on this update on, again, focusing on 100 in this case. So thank you for that. We share your excitement. Disclaimers. So again, just for those who familiarising themselves still with Prescient, we've got a diversified portfolio in oncology, and it comprises more mature assets and all the way through to earlier stage assets, but it's a nice diversified portfolio that the most mature being targeted therapies, and again PTX-100 spearheading that with the potential to leap deep into clinical development, so what we hope will be the equivalent of like, say, a phase 3. And not only is it the most mature, it happens to be showing some really encouraging data, because it's all about the data. That presents a really unique opportunity for us. don't know if you know this, but don't believe that there's been a single oncology drug that has been approved by an Australian company, and we think we could very well be the first. Wouldn't that be nice? Cell Prime, which is a whole platform to enhance cell therapies. A lot of that grunt work has been done, and that is now ready for clinical testing. And Omni-CAR, which is our modular cell therapy platform that we licensed from University of Pennsylvania and Oxford University, potential to revolutionise the whole cell therapy game. It's an earlier stage program and has all of the excitement of a revolutionary platform. However, it is earlier and therefore carries with it a little bit more runway and risk. But isn't it nice to have a nice staggered portfolio that promises some value today and some value tomorrow? Trying to move ahead with this. Slide seems to have stalled. So again, to introduce the investment highlights, we have a simple model. We license the best technologies that we can find, and then we work with the best people we can find. So there is, it's a simple model. It's held us in good stead. We've got lots of shots on goal. You've seen them summarised on a prior slide, but again, cell therapy platforms and targeted therapies, and as a result, it gives rise not only for a lot of risk mitigation, but also value creation and news flow. And this is represented, without gilding the lily too much, in this pipeline slide. But let's start with those bottom ones, these targeted therapies, again, in response to your queries. PTX-100 is a novel, it's a first-in-class RAS pathway inhibitor. What does that mean? It means it's not a me too. It's the very first drug that works in the way that it works, and I'll touch on that in a minute. It is licensed from Yale University. It was co-invented by Yale and the Moffitt. We've got good relationships with both of those institutes, and this is how it works. So the RAS pathway is an important, it was the very first mutation discovered in cancers, and is responsible for a great deal of cancers and certain malignancies, up to 90% of them. When this switch inside cells, this growth switch goes awry, it results in cancer pretty much. So it's been the holy grail of intracellular targets for people to solve that problem. And until very, very recently, people haven't been able to switch off any type of RAS. And we took the inventors took the view, if you can't inhibit the parent, inhibit the children. And this is what makes it very, very unique. It switches it off downstream by inhibiting RORAC and RAL. And it's the only such drug that does this. It is in a current phase 1b study. It's also been in a prior study at Penn and Indiana. The current phase 1b was focused on safety, of course, as necessarily it is, but also looking at pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, which is how the drug behaves in the body, how it engages in the target, how long it lasts, and those sorts of things. It's being led by arguably Australia's foremost oncologist, internationally renowned expert, just happens to be in lymphomas, Professor Miles Prince. Couldn't be in better hands, and we're very lucky to have someone of his standing here in Australia, and Prescient's just delighted to be working with him, and to see his enthusiasm makes us feel very, very comfortable indeed. I'm going to just give you a summary on the latest bit of data that we've put out. So bear with me, this is the money slide. We're putting out an update very shortly on this. It will likely be in either next week or very shortly thereafter, as we have our latest patients in for scanning. What we have here is, well, ORR means overall response rate, and that is the proportion of patients who have some sort of response. It doesn't take into account stable disease, so those whose tumours shrink or disappear. So normally with these two types of T-cell lymphomas that we're now focusing on, PTCL, which is a peripheral T-cell lymphoma, and CTCL, which presents on the skin. They're sort of related diseases, but still quite distinct. In both of these cases, the standard of care and the target you're trying to beat is about 30%. And so far, small numbers of patients, but we've exceeded that substantially. Then you overlay with that what you would like to see in terms of the durability of those responses. And normally you would expect around 3 months. So let's just say conservatively, instead of 3 months, we would aim to target, in order to show something that clinicians and patients would get very excited about, a significant benefit over that 3 to 4 months would be 5 to 6 months. And when you think, it doesn't sound like long, but really that's basically doubling the effect of what you're seeing. So again, to summarize here, with the current standards of care, the best available therapies, only around 30 patients will get any response. And of those lucky 30%, it's really only 3 to 4 months. Let's call it 5 to 6. And you can see here, and I'll be clear, we're comparing means against medians here because we don't have enough patients for medians yet. But you can see that we're significantly outperforming this as well. This is encouraging because sometimes you see an initial encouraging response, but then the patients rebound. That is not what we're seeing here at all. We're seeing a very strong initial response that looks to be even more durable than you would otherwise expect. And of course, you have nothing if you don't have safety. SAEs is serious adverse events. This is the proportion of patients that you would normally see hospitalized because of their side effects, and we have none so far. So very, very encouraging, and we'll be updating this very shortly. This is presenting this in a different format, it's what's called a swimmer's plot, because it looks like, you know, swimmers in a lane. And you can see there that dotted red line, that's the standard of care. SOC is what you would expect, even, you know, from a durability perspective, if you are one of the lucky 30%. And you can see all of these, and those arrows, they're all still ongoing. I'm nudging past that, and even past our target, which is super encouraging. Long may that trend continue. There's a number, you're probably wondering what those little crosses are there. Those little red marks, they're the patients who are ineligible. I think 2 of them came off study for personal reasons but still count for efficacy, and unfortunately 1 patient passed away from COVID. So that's why they're ineligible, but they counted, they had no safety issues, which is good. So to illustrate, one of these patients had a very, very strong response in CTCL. This patient, just as a case in point, had failed many lines of therapy, had failed 5 prior lines of therapy, nothing was working, had a very poor quality of life, and got onto PTX-100 and had a near complete response. And you can see here this MSWAT score is a score of the disease, really, and you can see how quickly it dropped. And we've actually got we can update these photos as well, but you can see here, you know, picture tells 1,000 words. This is before and after, and we've got updated photos just come through actually, which I look forward to sharing with you, which confirms more of this, which is, you know, even less disease than you can see here on the right. So incredibly, it's quite a stunning response for a patient who had failed pretty much everything and had a really poor quality of life. So, you know, again, numbers in a table is one thing, but for you to see pictures of an actual patient and how this patient's benefited is something else altogether.
Did I jump and ask a question? Sorry,
Sure.
Cole's asked a question and I missed that it had come up, but before we move on, and it probably becomes less relevant, I might ask it. So it probably goes back a few slides, but the question was, why safety equals 7 but N equals 4?
That is fine. That is because safety is measured after that first cycle of therapy early on. And in order to be tested eligible for efficacy, that is obviously ongoing. And I just mentioned those 3 patients who were taken off study examples of that. So they were ineligible to be assessed for efficacy, but were eligible for safety, which is, that happens all the time in every single cancer trial.
Thank you.
No problem. So yeah, so we're currently concluding our expansion cohort in these T-cell lymphomas. We did meet our recruitment target of at least 8 by the end of the year, and it's still ongoing. What we didn't expect is that the patients would be on study for longer. So normally when we planned this, I mean, great problem to have. When we started planning the study and said, okay, we're going to focus on that, we assumed that, okay, let's try to beat that 30% ORR and let's try to get beat 3 or 4 months. We did not expect this. So that's why normally when you say, when does the trial finish? Well, finish has its own definitions. Finish is normally when the very last patient has finished the very last dose, and that is because that patient has either progressed or has passed away, and you draw a line in the sand and you wrap it up in a nice bow and goes, this is the finished complete data, and you analyse that. As you can see, we've got patients who are still on this study because they're deriving benefit and still responding. So great problem to have. So we're running our future plans in parallel, trying to anticipate what's going to happen. We still think that in these diseases of unmet need, and I'll go into this in the next couple of slides, that this has the potential to leap, pretty deep into clinical development. So what might be a 1B now could be huge for us if we can get into an accelerated approval study. So I mean, I can see why there's a lot of interest around this because of this accelerated approval potential. But which do we go after? I mean, we find ourselves in a good position where we've got patients responding in both PTCL and CTCL. PTCL peripheral, as the name suggests, is a type of lymphoma, a disease of these T cells, but that goes throughout the body. It's very aggressive. That's not very many patients per year, but it's a very high unmet need, and that means it's a high value market. And I've shown you this slide before, Folliton, which was approved some time ago now in 2009, at that stage was the only drug approved for relapse and refractory, which means patients who don't respond to current, to standard chemotherapies and whatnot. And that had an overall response rate of 27%. And you'll remember that, we're running small numbers so far at 50%, and their duration of response was, again, around that 3 to 4 months. So, I mean, it shows what the market opportunity is out there. It is still pretty unmet. There's been a couple of new agents in there, but again, none of them are really moving the needle in the way that I think clinicians are wanting to see. CTCL it's like a cousin disease, I guess. It's it's part of the pathology is sort of the same, but it's quite distinct in some other ways. There's less cases of this than PTCL. But again, there looks to be some good options early on in the disease, but invariably they stop working, and once they stop working, these patients who are relapsed have nothing, and their quality of life is dismal. So imagine having a disease where your cancer cells are attacking your own skin. You can't sleep, you can't dress yourself, you can't go to work, you can't sit down, you just can't be comfortable at all. It is incredibly awful disease that impacts quality of life. And this is speaking of safety, the question earlier on safety, these are PTCL, some of these are in common with CTCL, but you can see that these are the approved drugs, and you can see how problematic their safety profiles are. What you're looking at here is the frequency of events that lead to a hospitalization, not because of the disease, but because of the side effects of the drug. And you can see that anywhere between, for brentuximab, it's around 30%, and for mogamulizumab, it's almost 90% of the time a patient will be admitted to hospital. I'm not talking about a little bit of nausea and diarrhea or skin rashes that you can deal with at home. These are when you're admitted to hospital because of side effects. And by contrast, we're seeing a stunning safety profile. In the early days, I thought it was suspiciously safe. I thought, why is this so safe? Is it because it's not working? But no, we've got an excellent safety profile, and it looks to be doing something as well. So again, clinicians will always go for efficacy first and safety second, I think, when it comes to all things being equal. But, if all things were equal and you had even comparable efficacy, of course, you're going to favour a safer drug that is well suited to these, sometimes elderly patients, almost always very fragile patients, and also allows combinations where clinicians would like to mix and match. Look, we're not pursuing any combination studies. This looks to be working by itself, which is wonderful, but isn't it nice to have the door open to combinations down the track? And from a regulatory point of view, and we'll be focusing more on this because the landscape is shifting as we speak. So firstly, these trials are all conducted, this trial is conducted in Australia, but it is conducted under a US IND, which is like the driver's license you need to conduct a clinical trial in the US. So we've referenced that, which is the gold standard, and conducting the trial here under the TGA. But we've also got orphan drug approval for PTCL, and we are applying for CTCL. Let's keep our fingers crossed there. And we're also going to be applying for orphan status in the EU. What's this orphan status, you're asking? Well, in order to encourage people to focus on developing drugs for unmet needs that might be smaller markets, the FDA and regulators around the world have dangled the carrot and offered these incentives to look at these rarer diseases that would otherwise be less pursued. And that includes things like 7 years of market exclusivity, once you get your drug approved. So a guaranteed, sort of keeping the guaranteed moat around that business, once you get the drug approved. The other considerations we need to make is, do we need to pick PTCL or CTCL? Could we potentially go for a mixed label? That would be wonderful if it's possible. The FDA is moving the goalposts on accelerated approvals now, so what we thought was the type of trial design that we would have liked to have firmed up looks to be still a little bit more malleable. So we're engaging with our reg consultants, consistently actually as this evolves. It's always more data, more data, more data, and again, not being able to rule off this study is a good problem to have, but the data is continuing to unfold, so we have to be malleable in designing that upcoming trial as well, and the path forward. Now, just when we think we've got an idea of what the trial might look like, we've got what's, I wouldn't say a spanner in the works, that would be unkind, but another level of consideration we need to overlay on top of all of our thinking, and that is the FDA's Project Optimus, which is trying to reduce the dose of any drug that you give to a patient. So we just want to try to head that off at the pass. So basically what's happening is in a phase 1 trial, you give increasing amounts of your drug until you get to a dose that is hopefully working, but is certainly tolerable. And you can go all the way through to phase 2 and hopefully apply for a phase 3, and the FDA will now say, well, why did you pick this top dose? Can you prove that it didn't work? If you did de-escalate, can you get this done at a lower dose? And that is, they want to give the minimum. The FDA is asking companies to work out what's the minimum you need to get the best effect, not what is the best effect, the minimum to get the best effect. So what we might need to do a parallel sort of step down, build in another de-escalation arm into the study as well. All of this is totally addressable. They're just considerations when you're planning the study. It's just another permutation and combination that adds to the complexity of the design, not necessarily the execution. We would love to give less dose because you saw how much drug the patients are chewing through there. So to halve our cogs and do it at a lower dose would be a good thing as well. So that is PTX-100. We're very, very excited about that. If we can get an accelerated approval, it will be huge for Prescient, huge, 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 because that will mean that with a relatively modest study of less than 100 patients, you can get the drug approved for marketing if you hit your benchmarks. Let's not get carried away and assume what the phase 2 result's going to be, but that phase 2 result will enable you to get your drug on market. Yes, you have to do a post-market confirmatory study, but in the meantime, you're selling drug, baby, and it's that is huge. So again, I can't think of an Australian company in the history of drug development that has carried one all the way through to approval. So we have that opportunity to be the first. Wouldn't that be huge? There's been Australian inventions taken overseas and approved. That's not quite what I'm talking about, but and I'm talking about how rare these opportunities are and how valuable they are. Certainly rare and certainly valuable. And you look at a company like Neuron and what they've been able to do with their sort of pivotal study, albeit in a non-oncology indication, but a rare disease, and how that sort of catapulted them to the next level as they then became a drug from a drug developer to on the cusp of being a drug marketer. So good on them, and I hope that we're able to share in even a fraction of their success. Would be lovely, wouldn't it? So PTX-200 is our other targeted therapy. It's also in the clinic. It is in AML right now. This is the one that I've spoken about before. It's stopped and started for various reasons. Most recently, it's had interruptions with staffing and various issues at an institutional level at Moffitt, which we couldn't control. They look to be resolved now, thank goodness. So it's the slowness is looks to be overcome, and we've got a deadline of around the middle of this year. We'd like to finish off the last couple of patients. We've had 4 complete responders on this study so far, which is great because this is a disease where people are normally dying in 6 months. And we had another patient with a partial response. And we've also got this orphan drug designation for PTX-200. So that's fantastic as well. Another bow in the quiver. I think we just have to be realistic, though. From the time we started this study in when was it, 2017, I think this study kicked off. Back then, there hadn't been a single drug approved for AML in 40 years, and since then there's been a bunch of them approved. So the whole landscape has changed, including a lot of off-label use of other drugs. So is the right combination going to be cytarabine? Because this PTX-200 in this case is used with the standard chemotherapy agent. It looks to be used less and less now. But let's just rule off that data and see what the package looks like, and we'll just need to make a decision on how far we carry it there. But I just want to be very direct with you and about what our expectations are with this. I think the landscape has changed, and we need to have a long, hard look at where this would fit. Does the drug have biological activity? It almost certainly looks to have biological activity, but what's the right combinations to have, and do we want to carry that on our own balance sheet, or try to find some sort of sponsored research to find that out? That'll be something for us to decide in the wake of the data. But this will be continuing to spit out news in the meantime, so it's good to have that back on track. So I'll stop there before I... Pat, did you want to field any more questions on the targeted therapies? I know we wanted to respond to some queries on that on this presentation, but do you want me to keep forging ahead?
Yeah, look, let me just have a quick look at the questions. I might go back to a couple. So Brett's asked, in a best case scenario, what could be the time frame to market?
Oh, to market, that's skipping ahead several steps. Well, it'd be really nice. I think it'd be a hell of an achievement if we can have a trial open for our next study this year. And who knows, maybe our phase 1B is still ongoing. That's if the patients are still on therapy. But to have started that next one, or at least have it open this year, would be a hell of an achievement. Then you're looking at, and that would be a multi-center study. So that's like the no-joke study. I reckon that could take a couple of years with another maybe half a year for readout and reg interactions, another 6 months. So that we could be in the position that, sort of 3 years post that study, we've got a, or perhaps even earlier, that 2 to 3 years post commencement, we've got an accelerated approval. So that doesn't mean the study stops, right? That means, can you get permission to then take this to market? And that's the position we could be in at around that sort of year 3 mark if everything went well. That assumes good rates of recruitment and how big the study is. But I'm trying to, I don't want to be misleading, but I want to answer the spirit of the question. It's not 7 to 10 years that it normally would be, right, for a normal drug development path. And hundreds of patients and hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not that. It's not 7 to 10 years from now. It's a fraction of that.
Yeah, thank you. George has asked, given the KRAS mutation is common feature in a broad range of malignancies, does PTX have a view on a roadmap to the use of PTX-100 in other applications? This, after all, would broaden its commercial value.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think that'll be limited by the patent life of the drug, and that's why we're looking at, this patent was, I think we've got a few more years on the composition of matter, and we're trying to put new patents around this all the time, but the core composition of matter doesn't have forever, that you would need to then do like a huge lung cancer study, but certainly, yes, there is the opportunity to do other malignancies here. Rather than spread ourselves too thin, I think we've taken the view that let's just cross the finish line and you have a beachhead indication, and then you can spread out and do the other indications. And that might even just happen in hematology, right? It could just be, for our discussions with the regulators, and also we're about to appoint a guy in commercial and access and pricing. That's the stage we're getting to. So it might be your beachhead is CTCL, and you come out with a subsequent confirmatory study for PTCL, for example, and then you can go to other bigger indications and you can build it out that way. And that's in a similar manner you could do that with other malignancies where the RAS mutation is prevalent. And then we can also look at other novel combinations. We could research this for decades, I guess, in that regard, but we just want to get the shortest line between now and approval. I think the spirit of the question, though, is would you just stop there? No, we wouldn't need to stop there. There'd be other opportunities available to it as well. But this would be, has the potential to transform you from a drug developer into a specialty pharma company if that's the way we wanted to go. So, yeah, that's the opportunity. It doesn't need this market, even these smaller markets, because they're so unmet and the drug pricing is so high in these markets. The opportunities are still huge, even though the markets are, from a patient size perspective, is not large. More than enough for us.
You've spoken to some of this question, but I'll ask it in totality. And but Matthew's asked if you said if we can get an accelerated approval path for PTX-100 would be great for Prescient. Can you please elaborate on the process forward and what are the specific requirements still to be ticked off to achieve this?
Yeah, I think we've sort of addressed most of that. It's basically about your reg interactions. They want to see some more phase 1 data. Then you have, normally your end of phase 1 meeting is just a bit of it's not a meaningful, incredibly meaningful meeting, because then you've got to do a phase 2. This would be like a end of phase 1 study that we would then need to do with an eye to hopefully an accelerated approval study. So it's a more comprehensive data package. You need to prepare properly. You need to have all your CMC work. That's chemistry, manufacturing, controls, all of those boxes ticked. You've got to look pretty professional. You've got to have just a robust package of supporting data in addition to your clinical data, and that's what we're assembling now. They also want to see a good body of safety as well. And pleasingly, we're not just relying on the safety that we've generated from this study, but also on the prior study.
Cole, I'm going to modify your question slightly because of reference to share prices and other bits, but just I think the core of this question is, can we get a realistic time frame of expected value-adding catalysts? Why should an investor stay in this company?
Well, there's no shortage of catalysts. I think I've just outlined what's happening with a drug that just happens to be working. If you want to bail just before the data starts to really mature, that's your call. But we believe that we're on the cusp of some pretty special things. There's always shiny and new in drug development. I get that. We're in this game ultimately to treat patients and to move the needle on what they would normally otherwise receive. Okay, that's where we get to. All of these platform developments, these new drugs you see people bringing on, it's all to get to this type of a point now. So that's what we're in it for. You get a piece of pie today and you get a piece of pie tomorrow. So we've got some lovely platforms that are doing some wonderful things, and we've got some drugs doing exactly the sort of things you'd expect a drug to be doing. So far as timelines go, we're going to be presenting some more data on this, some more incremental data on PTX-100. Hopefully the trend continues. I think it sets us up for a soft landing if it doesn't, but I'm not going to foreshadow any data. If we do march ahead, it'll be, again, the landscape that we'll be able to articulate the reg strategy, I'd like to think by the middle of the year, and map a path forward to get this, hopefully in a position where we're, the next stage of our development, fingers crossed, it's an accelerated approval or something very like an accelerated approval study, would be a huge catalyst for it. I'm not going to anticipate that we'd get it. I'm saying that would be what would be a big catalyst. Maybe the biggest catalyst we've ever had would be an accelerated approval. So, and that would be this year as well. In the meantime, we've got our other platforms putting out data. So I'm not giving financial advice on people what they should be doing. I'm looking at the share price too. I'm not happy about it. I look at the whole sector. I'm invested across the biotech sector. I'm not happy with what I see. So I'm not going to give advice on what you should be doing. I'm just stating that the data is looking positive in our most mature asset, and we've also got some platforms that are doing some very unique things.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, possibly maybe putting you on the spot here, but what would be a comparable to a PTX-100, and maybe what would moving into the next phases?
I think, well, looking what Neuron did is a wonderful case, because Rett disease is not the largest disease. It's not in oncology. I can't think of an Aussie company that has taken an orphan drug in oncology into an accelerated approval, unfortunately. Lots of larger US companies have and have done very well, and carved out big markets, even in pediatrics alone. So no shortage of, and maybe I can prepare some information there as to what that might look like. In the meantime, that former slide on Fullerton shows you what's possible in PTCL, and I seem to have lost control of the slides. But if you click back to slide 19, that'll show you possible from a commercial point of view with, at least in PTCL, let alone CTCL. So that drug sells for $500,000 a year, and it doesn't work particularly well. So I'm not saying we'd price our drug at that, but it shows what these guys are getting away with. I don't think it sells particularly well because it doesn't work and it's expensive. But, you can picture you get a fraction of that market and your drug's, still over $100,000. I think you're still doing very, very well.
All right, we've got through the questions. Stephen, did you want to continue on with any more slides, or?
I'm happy to. I know we're sort of a bit pressed for time now, and I know that this was a very, that this session today was, it was pulled together in response to these questions. So I just want to be respectful of that. So I'm happy to ask you to read the room, and I'm happy to push forward if you want and speak about cell therapies.
If anyone wants to get the broader overview of PTX, we have a recorded session on the PTX Investor Centre on their website. We also have one on Reach Markets website. What we'll do is we'll send the recording around for this session, and we'll also send the recording which has got the complete overview of all the assets and so forth. So I think that's probably the best way to do it, Stephen. If anyone's got any final questions while we've got Stephen on the session, please put them in. If not, I suggest we call the session to a halt in the moment. Stephen, I'm not seeing any question come through at the moment, so I might leave the last word with you.
Yeah, it's just about where we started, really, which is that we've got a lovely platform, especially in shaky markets. I understand people want some some reassurance about where things are going. Just go back to the basics about what your portfolio looks like. We don't have all our eggs in one basket. We've got targeted therapies that, not only are the most mature at a mature stage of development, but as I just finished mentioning, is showing some fantastic activity in these areas of unmet need. It's not even showing activity in areas where it's reasonably well served and then we've got to have a competitive proposition. Encouraging activity in diseases of unmet need. Then we've got Cell Prime as well, this platform that can be plugged into existing cell therapy programs right now that is ready for the clinic. And we've got Omnicare as well, which, we get that right, can change the world in cell therapy, in preclinical development. So there's a lot to like. We've got a healthy cash balance. We do have some options at the moment, which are probably a little bit of a headwind on the stock, but that'll be a temporary phenomenon, we hope, as those options expire. In the meantime, there's a lot to love, and look forward to updating you in the future. So many thanks for your time, and happy to take your questions in the future.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time.